We are in 1 Samuel chapter 17 as we finished chapter 16 last week. So yeah, keep praying for Brother Keith.
Yeah, man.
And then me and Preacher, Lord willing, are headed to Indiana Thursday and Friday to preach at the non-registered Baptist Bible Fellowship down there in Shoals, Indiana. So we're going to head down there. That's the plan right now. We're going to head down there. So you pray for us. A couple of the kids are going to come with us too. So I'm looking forward to it. It's nice to hear from other people, other preachers, kind of meet them in their environment. You know, they were here in July, but it'll be nice to go to their place and see what they have going on down there. So we're looking forward to that. 1 Samuel chapter 17. We'll stand and we'll read, the first 11 verses or so, but we're going to get past that. I'm pretty confident we're going to get past that in our teaching, but we'll read the first 11 verses of 1 Samuel, and then we'll see where the Lord will take us from there. So 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse number 1. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shoco, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched against Shoco to Azekah in Damim. You know those Hebrew words, interesting pronunciations. Verse number 2, And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. And his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. And if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Lord, now we ask you to take us through this account of David and Goliath and all the lessons that we can take from that and apply to our lives here today. Not just to see what was going on there with them, but how there's lessons there for us as well. We ask all this now in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we're getting into the very familiar account of David and Goliath. It's like everyone knows of David and Goliath, or it used to be that way. I don't think if you asked somebody on the street if they'd ever heard of it, that they would even say yes anymore. It used to be everybody knew Daniel in the lion's den, and Joseph's coat of many colors, and Noah and the ark, and David and Goliath, and like everybody knew that. Even non-Christians knew those stories. You can't even be sure about that anymore. We're running into people who have never, ever, ever been in a church. Very interesting times we live in. Very crazy times. So here we have this familiar account here. So verse number 1, Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shoco, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shoco and Azekah in Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. Array just means put in order. They ordered their armies against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Okay, so it seems pretty elementary here. You got one army on one mountain, the other army on another mountain, and the valley in between them. And then there's this Philistine, this guy, this Goliath, who's of Gath. Now, Gath should mean something. That's where the giants are from. If you look at Numbers chapter 13, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. If you look at Numbers 13, when they were going through the wilderness here, verse number 33, Numbers 13:33, you see it says this, and there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and were in their own sight, and we were in their own sight, our own sight, as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Of course, this is the account of Caleb and them, the spies. The giants came from Gath, and it's interesting because in the Institute, we'll go to Genesis chapter 6. We kind of start the discussion in Genesis chapter 6 because that's where the giants come from, and you find out there's this sort of mixture of fallen angels and humans, and the giants are somehow men of renown come from that. Giants are the result of that. I'm not going to break that all down here. We get into that in angelology. I mean, in depth. We spend weeks. Anybody that's been in the Institute can attest to that. We spend weeks, hours, just talking about the account of Genesis chapter 6, and there's more there that meets the eye. It's not really that difficult. You're not stretching anything when you point out these things from Genesis chapter 6. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. For example, right there in Genesis chapter 6, it talks about and Noah was perfect in his generations. And the word is plural. And Noah was perfect in his generations. And it's like 90% of the preaching that comes out of Genesis chapter 6 talks about how Noah was like a good man among his peers. Because the way we use the word generation, we're the baby boomer generation or the millennial generation or Generation X. That's kind of how we use the term generation, but that's not what the term means. If you own a generator, what does it do? It produces something, right? It generates something. In this case, it would be electricity. That's what we call it, a generator. Noah's generations were perfect because they hadn't been polluted by the fallen angels. Right. That was the whole point. Noah's family was chosen because it says in the text that these are the generations of Noah, Shem, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. So those are the generations of Noah. They were his children. He generated those children. He created those children through his marriages. Marriage or marriages, we're not quite sure. So he was perfect in his generations. In other words, his children were all humans. They were 100% human. And God's intention with the flood was just to preserve humanity, but eradicate all these half-breeds. And so these men of renown were your Thors and your Hercules of Greek mythology, Roman mythology. Those things come from real accounts, but of course they're elaborated upon and built upon, and then you end up with the myths. But they come from real accounts. The Greeks and the Romans believed in demigods. If you've ever studied that stuff, what was a demigod? A demigod was the offspring of a god and a human. What do you think a devil would be to humans? It would be a god, supernatural power. So it's not like the Greeks and the Romans just made this stuff up out of thin air. There had been stories told down from generations past all about what happened back there in Genesis chapter 6. And that's why God eradicated the earth. And it's interesting because when you talk to people, a lot of non-Christians will point to the account of the flood in the Bible and indict God for it. They'll say, what a horrible God. Right. Do you worship the God that killed all those innocent men, women, and children in a flood and just wiped out all of humanity? There were babies in that flood that were killed. And they're right, there were. They're like, you worship that God that drowned out babies, pregnant women, people that haven't done anything? Why would your God kill all those people? Who wants to worship a God like that? I'll tell you that to your face. Had that happened more than on an occasion. Well, most Christians are like, oh, well, yeah, but... And they have no answers. So, well, you're not helping that person if you don't have any answers. Right. You just basically supported his reasonable position. It's not unreasonable to think that. That's a reasonable question. Why would God do that? And getting into the whole sin nature thing, that's a different story. But the answer to that is the scriptures say, but there were giants in the earth in those days. That's why. Because there was a satanic rebellion. Why? Why does this mean anything? Because what did God tell the devil in the curse after Adam and Eve fell? What did God tell the devil? That the seed of the woman would bruise the head of the seed of the serpent.
Amen.
So the devil knew that in the future, a human was going to conquer the devil.
Right.
So if the devil can eradicate humanity, he wins. If he could pervert the seed of the woman, he wins. So he tried. Or he sent some to try for him. And that's interesting too, because the sons of Anak, which you just read there in Numbers chapter 13, the sons of Anak are the Anakims, which were the giants. But Anak was the son of Arba. He's called a great man. And it's likely Arba was the name of the devil that produced Anak. And we get into that in Institute. It explains a lot. I've already kind of gone further than I wanted to go, and I hope I'm not confusing you. But giants weren't just some, like crazy thyroid problem. Because there are people today that we would call giants that have a thyroid issue. But that's not the same thing what the Bible's talking about. Right? These were giants. Okay? And it says here in our text in 1 Samuel chapter 17 that his height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, according to most people, that's like 9 foot tall, something. But if you go by the royal cubit, he was over 11 feet tall. He was almost 12 feet tall. I kind of roll with that one because that's a little more intimidating than a 9-foot guy. A 9-foot guy wouldn't even touch the ceiling in here. You could take that guy with a few of you. You could take that guy. I mean, he's big, but a few of you could handle that. A 12-foot guy? Just think how wide his hips are and his shoulders at 12 foot tall. He's not like the same, slender as you and I are, but he's just super tall. His body's framework would be proportional to that. Dude would be absolutely huge. So Goliath was nothing to shake a stick at. This was a big dude, right? And so we mentioned the giants earlier too, and that's, and Gath, that's where the giants were. They were almost all completely eradicated there when Joshua came in to the promised land. And I won't get into all that too, because that was already gone through when we went through those books. So this is a tall guy. This guy's almost 12 feet tall. And he had an helmet, verse number 5, and he had an helmet of brass upon his head. That's got to be a big helmet. Think about a big head. Man. 12 foot tall. And he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. By the way, just to back up a little bit, you have to have that answer for that guy that's shaking his fist at God. Because when you give them that answer, there were giants in the earth in those days, then they've got no response to that because you just gave them a reasonable reason why God would flood the world that they were ignorant of. Now they're going to have to reassess their anger at God because you just made a justification for it. Right? It's important that you understand this stuff. And that's why I bring this stuff up, because it's like, when I got saved, I didn't just get stupid all of a sudden. Right? I didn't all of a sudden just start believing in invisible stuff and throwing common sense out the window. Right? And most Christians don't do themselves favors. It's not even really their fault. It's their preacher's fault because they don't teach them anything. Who talks about this stuff? You know what I'm saying? Preachers avoid this stuff on purpose because it creates contention and people want to argue about it. Well, who cares if you want to argue about it? Let's argue about it. I mean, what's wrong with arguing? Isn't that how you reason? Isn't that what reasoning is? Arguing things through? So when I got saved, I didn't just all of a sudden become stupid. When I got saved, I left the Catholic Church, and I told myself, I'm never going to be lied to again. I am never going to be lied to again. And that's not saying Catholic people are bad. They're not. There's some really good Catholic people that shame Baptists, make a joke out of half the Baptists anyways, or that they call themselves Baptists. So this isn't about the people and their behavior. A good Catholic could be the best neighbor and friend you ever had.
Sure.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the doctrine of the church. And that's what I mean by I'm not going to ever let anybody lie to me ever again. And so when I got saved and started learning and reading my Bible, right, okay, I'm checking everything. I don't care who you are. You tell me whatever you want to tell me. I'm double checking, I'm triple checking, I'm testing that thing. I'm arguing out in my head. I'm coming up with counterpoints, but what about this, but what about that? I'm thinking it through. This stuff is all reasonable. It answers everything you see outside the doors. It answers everything that you see. That's why you see me so enthusiastic about even political things, because to me it's not just politics, it's spiritual. There's things going on. Like I said last week, there are things going on that I can see happening that attack the paradigm created by the Bible, which answers everything that you see in reality. And this sophistry that I mentioned last week that's going on out there is satanic. It's not just political, it's satanic. It's leading to the one world government. That's what's happening. They're attacking the family. I'm going to get into that in a minute too. So I thought I'd make sure I emphasize that point. You got to have answers for the hope that lieth within you. If any man asks, you got to have answers. So I like to give you answers. I have answers. I'm not guessing when I say this stuff. I have answers, real answers. And I know their answers because I've tested this stuff against people that disagree with me over and over and over and over again. And I'm not ringing my bell. I'm just saying I have a lot of experience, more experience than most people you know that are Christians. I have more experience than most people you know in apologetics, in debating issues like Scripture. I'm confident in what I believe because I've tested it. This isn't just stuff I talk about here at church. I talk about this stuff in the real world and debate it and argue it. There are real answers, reasonable answers, not just believe it because I said so or because a book said so. You just believe that because the Bible says so. You just believe books written by men. And you've heard me say this before, but you go to college and pay money to believe stuff written in books by men. Okay, so what do you mean by that? I'm believing in books written by men. How come the books written by the men that I'm following here answer everything without error, and it addresses everything in reality, and it fits like a glove, but what you're telling me is just fantasy?
Right.
Boys can be girls. Get out of here. You've already left reality. That we don't even have to have any more discussion.
Yep.
So there are answers. You need to get those answers. Don't write off the Bible and the book because you don't have the answers. Find somebody that has the answers and ask them.
Amen.
Ask them questions. Believe me, I've asked them all. I could talk to people about this stuff, and I know the next 5 things they're going to say before they even know what they're going to say. That's how many times I've had these conversations. And I'm only saying that, those are my bona fides. I'm only saying that so that you can have confidence in what I'm telling you now. Right? Like if you go to a doctor and he wants to operate on your brain, it might be a good idea to hear him say, I've done thousands of these operations. I did 2 of them last week, just like the one that I have with you. And it's really easy. You're going to be fine. I'm going to take care of it. I could do this in my sleep. You're in good hands.
Yep.
That's what I'm telling you right now. That's what I'm saying. It's not bragging. I'm just giving you comfort in what I'm telling you. I'm not trying to bewitch you. I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not trying to fool you. I'm not giving you some sort of psychological game. I'm telling you. I know these things, and the Bible backs all this stuff up, and so does reality. It's not just because it's in the book. And it says that he had this helmet of brass on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. 5,000 shekels of brass is about 126 pounds.
Wow.
His coat weighed 126 pounds. And it's a fighting coat, so he could still move in it. But he himself probably weighed 1,100 pounds or whatever, I don't know. You know, he had himself weigh quite a bit, so this was only probably 10% of his body weight. So if you had a 20-pound coat of mail on and you weighed 200 pounds, but you bought the equivalent. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs. And those are like cover your shins.
Right.
And a target of brass between his shoulders. What does that mean? Shoot me here?
Right.
The word target just means circular.
Okay.
So that's why you're shooting at the target, it's a circle.
Right.
Right? Now, it means a little bit more now. Target means literally something you're shooting at or you're aiming for, but that's not really what the word's original intent was. It just meant a circle. It's circular. So he had a target of brass between his shoulders. Now, I don't know if this was in front, because he had a coat of mail, or if it was in the back, sort of like, with straps to kind of hold the coat on the front. I don't know if it was between his shoulders here, or if it was between his shoulders, in the back. It doesn't say. I tend to lean on his back, but because he also had a shield carried by an armor bearer, which you wouldn't need if you had one here. Plus, he had a coat of mail, so I don't know. Nonetheless, he had one between his shoulders, front or back. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. Now, we've lost the art of weaving. Nobody really knows what this even means anymore. Weaving, I can't explain it even to you myself. I know what it is, but I don't know how to do it. I wouldn't know how to operate a weaver's beam. But a weaver's beam would have been the top or bottom beam, and you thread your material or whatever thread between these beams, and it had to carry and hold the stress of all these threads tightly wound around it. So it was big. Then it also had to be big enough to carry a spear's head that weighed 600 shekels of iron, which is about 15 pounds. Now, that doesn't seem like much, right? 15 pounds, Well, we're not talking about 15 pounds. Put that 15 pounds on the end of a broomstick and tell me you can pick that up. That's the spear's head that was 15 pounds. Right? Just hold a broomstick out like this for a minute and your arm's going to be shaking. But put 15 pounds on the other end of it and see what happens. And then to be able to throw it. And then imagine you getting hit with 15 pounds on the end of a weaver's beam. That thing would just like go through you and put a hole in you this big. Man, that's some power. There would be some serious, there's kinetic energy in that thing when he's getting ready to throw that thing. And with firearms, when you get hit with a high caliber round, it punches you. You do get knocked back. It punches you. Well, just think about a 15-pound spearhead. It don't matter what armor you have on at that point. You're not stopping that thing. Can you imagine seeing some dude throw something like that? It'd probably knock trees down. And then he had verse 7, the end of verse 7, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, now remember, the word cry, it just means to yell out. It doesn't mean weeping, right? We say cry when people are crying, we're talking about them weeping. But when people cried in the Bible, it's not weeping. When John the Baptist was the voice of one crying in the wilderness, he wasn't boo-hooing behind a fern leaf. When it says lift your voice like a trumpet and cry aloud, it's telling you to yell out. So he's walking out there all big and bad, and he's yelling out to the Israelites, right? He's crying out. Remember, you ever heard of the town crier?
Right.
Yeah, he's not some guy crying in the middle of the street, weeping. He would be, hear ye, right? That guy, he got the cool clothes or whatever, the frilly thing, hear ye, whatever. So they didn't have newspapers, so you had to go to the town crier and he'd tell you all the gossip. Maybe standing on a little thing with the curly slippers. I don't know. But anyway, so that's what crying is. So he cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Sounds like a fair fight. 12-foot guy. Yeah, we'll just fight one-on-one. And like, who stakes the entire destiny of their nation upon a one-on-one fight with a giant? Get out of here. But, he's got all the odds on his side, so why not? That's the guy in the bar saying, all right, let's do it. And he's like all super huge and crazy out of his mind. That guy, that's Goliath. He's like, I'll take on all comers. Yeah, because that's all he does is fight. It's not a fair fight. It's like the 15-year-old screaming out to the toddlers at daycare, who wants to take me on? You know what I mean? It's just like, really? So in verse 11, when Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. What a bunch of cowards. What a bunch of cowards. And David's going to fix that. But they didn't have a leader. Why do you think they were so afraid? They didn't have a leader. If you don't have a leader, well, somebody's just waiting for somebody to stand up. I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen that at work. How many times I've done that at work, where people aren't doing anything. They know what to do, but they just kind of don't want to be the one to break the ice and do it because they're waiting on everyone else to do it. But then you're like, hey, come on, guys, we got to do this. We got to move these cars over here, and we got to do this thing here. And then you get up and you go do it, then people follow you. All of a sudden, you get the work done. They're just waiting for somebody to take the lead.
Right.
These people are rudderless right now. Saul's not a leader at this point. This guy's got an evil spirit from the Lord.
Right.
So, of course, and where is he? Why isn't he there?
Right.
What kind of leader is that? And I'll have some comments about that, about fear later, which does have an application to the current situation that we're in the United States, fear. What kind of leader goes around talking about and trying to scare you constantly? You're going to die. We can't do anything until we conquer the virus. But we're not going to fight it. We're just going to cower in a corner.
Right.
Anyway, okay, I'm going to reserve that. I've got a place to dig into that in a little bit. So, verse number 12. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons. And we already know that because we've been introduced to Jesse before. And the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. So he was an elder. He was considered an elder in the community. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, the next unto him, Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So he still understood his duty to his family. So he was serving Saul and doing what he could there. Remember, he was playing the harp and all that other kind of stuff. But he knew his dad needed help, so he still felt his allegiance. He had a bit bigger allegiance to his father than he did the king. I think it's important to understand that. David took his family seriously, and he took his responsibility to his family seriously. He didn't think about himself. Why did he go home to do that? I mean, he had a maid. He's like important. He's in the king's court. All he has to do is play a harp. He could just hang out there, eating at the king's table, be some Mr. Big Shot. He didn't have to go home and help his dad, but he felt the duty to go help his dad. And you'll see why he felt the duty to help his dad here in a minute. So, David reads verse 15, but David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. So Goliath, he challenges Israel 40 days straight, and nobody dares take him up on it. So he's taunting them. for 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. So here's Jesse still providing for his sons that are on the battlefield. He's taking his duty as a father seriously. He still believes it's his responsibility to provide for his sons, even though they're in the army, and the king should be taking care of them. But he's not leaving it to the king. That's my job, he says. That's my job to take care of my children, even though they're grown and they're now fighting in a war. I'm still going to, as long as I can, I'm going to provide. This stuff is important for you to understand. It's these types of gender roles that are important.
Right.
It's these gender roles that are being attacked, and there's reasons for that. There's satanic reasons for that. I've mentioned this before. It's important. These gender roles are important. It's not because women aren't capable of providing for their families. That's not the point at all. When you even talk about this stuff, all of a sudden it seems like you're attacking women, like they're children and need to be taken care of, like children. No, that's not what's being said at all. The wife should be your biggest ally.
Right.
It's just God's holding the man responsible. So he has to take that responsibility because God's requiring it of him. But Jesus revolutionized the way people looked at God by saying, when you pray, pray after this manner: Our Father, which art in heaven. So that word Father has to mean something, or you don't even know who God is then. What does that mean to a poor kid in the inner city today? God is your father. What, he's a loser? He's somebody who's not around? Somebody who doesn't take care of me? What does that mean to a child?
Yep. Right.
You don't think there's satanic forces behind destroying the family?
That's right.
It's so you can't see God. It's so you can't know God. That's what's happening. It's so you can't know him with simple terms. God made it this way on purpose so that you can understand who he is. And so men have to fulfill that role so that when they learn that lesson, oh, God's a provider for me. He protects me. He takes care of me. He shields me. He teaches me. He has wisdom. Yeah, that's why the men have to play their role. It has nothing to do with whether a woman's capable of it or not. The whole thing was set up on purpose that all around you, whether you're a born-again Christian or not, you know what a father is and what he's supposed to be.
Amen.
Same with the wife in the church. And I could apply that. Are you starting to follow why this stuff is satanic out here in the real world, and why this discussion about gender identity is satanic?
Yes.
There's a reason why that's being attacked. Do you think these people actually care about confused people that are mentally ill? No, it's a political thing. But ultimately it's satanic.
Right.
You got to know the bigger picture. But you can't know the bigger picture if you're not paying attention. So Jesse was still providing for his children, even though they were grown and they were soldiers in a war. So Jesse, verse 17, said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. In other words, find out how they're doing, and then receive that word, and make sure you bring it back to me. Let me know how they're doing. Verse number 19. Well, I can just go more into the whole same-sex marriage thing. Why was that a big deal? Why are we so against that? Why do we care what two people do in their own private life? I don't care what two people do in their own private life. Do whatever you want, whatever floats your boat. I'll preach to you, but I'm not going to be mean to you. I'm not going to hate on you. I'll be a friend to you. I'm a friend to liars.
Right.
They're sinners too. You know what I'm saying? You can still be friendly and disagree with people. But why is it a big deal? Why was that a big deal? Why was that satanic? Well, number one, marriage means something.
That's right.
It has a meaning. It doesn't just have anything, it had nothing to do with love. It was a covenant. Now, love would be like a good thing to have in that covenant, but it's a covenant, right? It's a partnership. What is a husband? What does that word even mean? What does that word mean? Do you even know? What is husbandry?
Farming.
Right. It's the one who oversees property and cares for everything. That's what a husband is. What is a wife? You ever heard of a midwife?
Right.
It has to do with birthing. Right? Birth. So a wife does what? Gives birth. A husband does what? Provides, protects, supplies. So how do you get two women marrying each other and this is my wife? No, she's not. No, she's not. You can call her that all day long. She's not. She can't be. Because she can't birth anything of yours.
That's right.
She can't be a wife to you. Get out of here. Same with the husbands. Can't do that. Why didn't you ever think of this stuff? I did. Why? Because it's satanic. Don't you understand what's happening around you? Why was that a big deal? Why did the government ever get involved in marriage in the first place? With tax, because the argument always was, well, it's not fair we're being discriminated against as gay people because we don't get the same benefits and tax deductions and all this other kind of stuff, and I can't go see my partner in the hospital and all that. Well, you can do all that through civil unions and contracts and all other kind of stuff. Do your thing. But why does it have to be marriage? Why do you have to call it marriage? Why do you have to insist that that be the word? Because they're trying to destroy what it means.
Right.
Because they could have all that same stuff taken care of in a contract, civil unions, because that's what they were arguing for decades. Then it jumped to marriage. Yep. Why? Because they're attacking the church. That'd be like the government redefining what baptism is. Marriage is a religious term. That word marriage existed before government existed. So what gave them the right to redefine it? And where did they find that in the Constitution? They didn't. They pulled it out of thin air. But why? Well, how is that satanic? What does that even mean? The same-sex marriage thing is an assault upon God's order and the natural order of things. And there were reasons for that. And the government got involved with it for why? There were reasonable reasons for it. Not necessarily that I agree with it, but society has a vested interest that generations be propagated. So they wanted to incentivize people to get married because that will produce children. Not only will it produce children, but in a marriage, the man provides, and then we don't have to. Why do you think your taxes are through the roof? Because you're paying to take care of everyone else's kids.
Right.
Because the couple's not married and the man's not performing the duties of a husband. So now the government has to raise them kids. There's a reason why the government incentivized marriage. Because there was a return on investment. More taxpayers, more consumers, the population is going to grow. Society has an interest in that. They do not have an interest in you just having a bunch of kids that are wayward and misled and have no guidance or nothing. It destroys society. Why would they incentivize gay people? What's the return on investment? They're not going to have any kids of their own. So why incentivize that? What's the point of that? It has no point. But does anybody think about that stuff? No, it's all about love. Well, get out of here. I love my dad, but I'm not going to marry him.
Amen.
And people fall for the sophistry. Young people are falling for it, but it's all about love. It has nothing to do with that whatsoever. And you're watching the fabric of society be absolutely destroyed before you with all this nonsense and satanic sophistry that has to do with marriage, gender roles, patriarchy, all that other kind of stuff, which was all good, which is what developed the society that you have now.
Exactly.
So I hope you're following me. It's a bigger deal. This is not just about, like I said, I don't care what people do. I'm not going to discriminate against anybody for what they do in their personal life. Well, what does that have to do with me? Nothing. I could care less. Do your thing. I'm not even going to look sideways at you. Now, if you want to talk about it, we might have a little difficulty in our discussion about it, and we're probably going to disagree, but I don't care what you do in your private life. It's freedom. Do whatever you want. You want to sin? Do whatever you want. As long as you're not hurting somebody else, I don't care. But it doesn't help society, is my point. And so when you incentivize it and you embrace it and you remove the stigma, then you're promoting it.
Yes.
Do you think kids aren't confused because of the embracing of all this stuff?
Absolutely.
Do you think there are kids in the Congo right now that are going, you know what, I think I'm the other gender, trapped in this body? Why do you think they're not thinking that? Because they just want their next meal. They're not confused because they don't have time to think about it. They don't live in a society that gives them the luxury to pretend they're something they're not. That's why. This country's been so spoiled, so pampered, that they even have the time to bother to shake their fist at God and the natural order because they've got so much time and ease and luxury on their hands to think this nonsense up in the first place. They could spend their whole lives trying to write articles and papers in college peer-reviewed magazines and things to promote this stuff. Who anywhere else in the world, but maybe a couple other places, has time to study that stuff and make money their whole life even thinking about that?
Right.
Nobody. Why? Because their society is not as good as the one that you were raised in, and now you're actively destroying it, and you don't even know it. And it's every little thing like that I'm talking about. Attacking the patriarchy, attacking what a father is, what his responsibility is, gender roles, what gender is, all that. It's satanic. And so you better wise up. Like I've been telling you week in and week out, this book is ordered. You do things God's ways, you're blessed. You don't do things God's ways, you're cursed. Not just because he said so,
Right.
because it is so.
Right.
Whether you believe the book or not, as far as heaven, hell, spiritual things, if you just do things his way, you end up with the United States. If you don't do things his way, you're going to end up with Uzbekistan or Chechnya or the Congo. And that's not xenophobic or racist or anything else, because I'm not talking about skin color. I'm talking about underlying paradigms, how society is governed. If you follow nature and nature's God, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights.
Right.
This country was founded on God's ways by imperfect men,
Right.
and it's taken decades and centuries to continue to perfect it, what they started,
Right.
but still the best place on the planet because of this book right here.
Amen.
And we're deviating from it, and Satan's taking you off track. Don't fall for it. I'm telling you, for the sake of your own society, I mean your own children's future. You're still children yourself, some of you. Your own children and grandchildren's future depends on your decisions that you're making now. You're either going to embrace this satanic assault upon your society, or you're going to fight it. I chose to fight it, so you can hear me keep talking about it because it comes from here in the first place. And I defy anybody to fight with me about it because I got answers. That's my point.
Amen.
I'm confident in that. So have those discussions. I got to wrap it up. Have those discussions. Discuss those things. Don't get caught away with this stuff because it will destroy you. It will. It will destroy you. Next thing you know, you're going to wake up in a society where you don't even have police anymore. Now what? You can't go to work. You can't even travel the road You can just have a gang just block off the corner of your house, take your wife, take your daughter, steal your car, shoot you in the back. What are you going to do? Do you think this society just formed itself by evolution? You think it just got here by random chance? Even if this stuff were socially constructed and God wasn't real, it works. So why would you go against it? It worked. Why would you fight against the things that work? That finally lifted people to a place that men have never experienced in the history of the world, and you're fighting against it. It doesn't make any reasonable sense, does it, preacher?
No.
Because it's satanic.
Right.
It's spiritual.
That's right.
All right, we'll leave it there. All right, Silas, can you pray for us?